And one point that August raised forcefully was the need to combine what's good for the climate, the environment, the planet, and what is good for the individual. And one such topic, obviously, is biking. So Lisa Rohrer, the last of these rapid-fire scientists, debunking the cycling myths. Lisa Rohrer, please.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Lisa Rohrer. I'm a research fellow at Nordregio. And welcome to the final talk of this morning. Lunch is just around the corner, we promise. But before we get there, we have about 10 to 15 minutes to speak a little bit more about mobility. Great. I'd like to start with a few figures. First, here we can see the total emissions in the Nordic region in 1990 and 2021, and it's showing that some progress is being made. There are fewer emissions in 2021 than there were in 1990. But, as we've heard ad nauseum today, there's more to be done. When we look at the progress being made within the transport emissions reductions, our progress from 1990 to 2021 looks like this. There has been minimal reduction overall, and in Denmark, Norway, and Iceland, transport emissions have increased since 1990. If we take a closer look, we learn that road transportation, here, which is shown in the dark green, accounts for between 70% and 96% of transport emissions in the Nordic countries. So just a few facts on this. 26% of total emissions in the Nordic region is credited specifically to transportation. 23% of total emissions is from road transportation. And if we look specifically at passenger cars, 15% of emissions in the Nordics is credited to this mode of transport. In absolute numbers, this is just under 30 million tons of CO2 equivalents, which is greater than the emissions credited to industrial processes and product use in the Nordic region as a whole, and about 4 times as much as emissions that are credited to the waste sector for the Nordic region. At the same time, the Nordic region is dealing with many other growing concerns, as we've heard about this morning, things like social polarization, injustice, loneliness, inequalities, and fears of some groups being left behind. So we know that sustainability is more than just an emissions reductions issue. How can we address these wide-ranging concerns? Do our solutions lie somewhere within this futuristic image? Is this what we might expect out of the green transition? Or could the future of the green transition look a little bit more like this? What might the humble bicycle fit? Where might the humble bicycle fit into this equation? Since 2023, Nordregio has been working with a network of capital cities and regional authorities in the Nordic region in a formal Nordic cycling network. And this network includes around 50 civil servants. These are traffic analysts and cycling strategists. And we partner with the European Cyclist Federation to conduct research on the Nordic countries' transportation policies and practices specifically related to cycling. In addition to reviewing mobility research and analyzing cycling policy, we've hosted 6 knowledge-sharing workshops among the practitioners in the network to discuss key issues for cycling in the Nordic region. Things like prioritizing cycling politically, winter maintenance, and multimodal transport. And in a few weeks, we will be publishing a policy brief where we will debunk 8 cycling myths that are common to the Nordic region. And in the policy brief, we'll describe the reality of the situation based on the findings from the Nordic-based studies and workshops among the network. And we share several planning and policy implications and provide some good practice examples coming out of the Nordic cities and regions. So we hope that this policy brief will be a very tangible output for others working in this field. But for the remainder of this presentation, I'll highlight 3 of these myths and just start to scratch the surface of some of the insights that we've gained from the network to help debunk some myths. The first myth is that cycling is for leisure and recreation. It's not really a realistic form of transport for everyone. But in 2024, the EU adopted a European Declaration on Cycling, which recognizes cycling as one of the most sustainable, accessible, and inclusive, low-cost, and healthy forms of transport and recreation. The bicycle can operate smoothly with other sustainable transport modes, and given the growing demand for and distribution of e-bikes, the bicycle can enable people of different ages and fitness levels to travel at equal speeds and cover both short and longer distances more comfortably. How can the Nordic region ensure that cycling is a legitimate transport option? One key point is that cycling cannot act in isolation, but must be integrated with other modes of transport, such as walking or public transport. However, all of the planners and strategists within our cycling network noted that the integration of cycling and public transport in their city or region could be improved, and one of them even said it's completely non-existent. The main barriers include things like lack of commitment among public transport companies, poor quality of bicycle storage, or lack of year-round city bike share systems. Combating these concerns, of course, requires collaboration among sustainable transport actors and the development of mobility strategies where cycling works with, rather than competing against, sustainable modes. In Denmark, 27% of public transport passengers have actually biked to transport stations to take the train or bus. And so one key element of facilitating this has been the cycle superhighways of the capital region. This is a network that many of you are probably familiar with, of cycling paths across the region, which provides inhabitants almost 750 kilometers of safe and comfortable infrastructure. And the region implemented these highways in line with frequently used public transport corridors, thereby enabling more people to choose sustainable transport and actually marry these transport options together. So the reality is that cycling does play a very important role in holistic mobility systems. But isn't cycling just too expensive? An economic assessment in Helsinki has found that every €1 invested in high-quality cycling infrastructure yields an €8 benefit for society, and studies in Denmark have shown similar positive results. From the user perspective, purchasing a bicycle is at least 98% cheaper than buying a car in the EU in 2023 at least, and it does not require high additional costs to store or fuel. And of course, as we heard from Jukka this morning, we hope that those individuals are not spending that money to fly to Mallorca. We hope that they're spending it in another way. Plus, the majority of households in Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and Norway already own a bicycle. Some studies outside of the Nordic region have shown how cycling has the potential to improve road safety for all road users. Commuter shifts from car to bike have the potential to reduce everyone's exposure to air pollution and noise pollution. They can improve physical activity, decrease cardiovascular disease, and reduce the burden of mental health disorders. And many planners in our network have also stressed that if more people are able to choose the bike over the car who can take the bike, this frees up a lot of space on roads or public transport for those who rely on those methods of mobility. So we're not saying everybody has to shift to a bike, but for those who can, it actually will help the people who do need to take the car. And while the benefits of cycling are clear, Nordic cities and regions still face challenges with providing and maintaining cycling infrastructure that can enable more people to cycle in order to gain these societal benefits. One recommendation emerging from the network is to reduce barriers that threaten the comfort and safety of vulnerable road users. And a study from Denmark indicates that cyclists rank right-turning vehicles, cycling close to trucks, and cycling on roads without cycle lanes as the conditions under which they feel most unsafe. The city of Oslo has also conducted a survey to measure cycling satisfaction between 2014 and 2022, and the results showed an increase in safety, with road users identifying separated and colored bicycle lanes as a key factor. And so they've developed these red lanes, which are now part of the city's urban design manual, and that's been a really key way to improve safety very effectively. And other traffic reports out of Sweden have suggested lowering the speeds to 30 kilometers per hour in urban areas or creating low traffic zones. And this, of course, helps keep both cars and cyclists safer, but also reduces noise pollution at the same time. And since cycling has many cross-sectoral benefits, it can be used as a means for achieving objectives across different departments and policy areas. So other points of application include building bridges across administrative departments and supporting cycling with greater central government investments per inhabitant. It's also really important for cities and regions to invest in high-quality data collection methods so that they can conduct more studies like health economic assessments and actually get a sense of where the benefits are coming from, and also investing in winter cycling maintenance. But based on the studies that have been carried out, we conclude that providing and maintaining cycling infrastructure is well worth the investment. The last myth that I want to address is that cycling cannot really make a serious impact. Instead, we can achieve sustainability goals by trading in fossil fuel cars for electric vehicles. This has been a hot topic in the Nordic region for some years. As of 2023, the Nordic countries lead the way in numbers of newly registered electric cars. And while vehicle electrification is undoubtedly an important part of the green transition, focusing our transportation efforts on making cars and vans more energy efficient tends to overlook the root issue. The European Environment Agency emphasizes that electric vehicles are not enough to achieve sustainable mobility systems. Research highlights the problems that electric vehicles pose to land use. Private vehicles, whether electric or not, require the maintenance and potential expansion of impervious surfaces, and designing around them will continue to lead to urban sprawl and exclusionary uses of public space. So in Denmark, the average number of passengers per car is about 1.3, making car lanes and large parking lots an inefficient use of space per person. And this space, as we know, could be used for alternative purposes, things like green space or housing, or better access for sustainable transport modes. Some recent research out of Stockholm has quite boldly claimed that private automobiles, including electric vehicles, are a form of structural violence because they create social injustice and indirect suffering due to the uneven distribution of space. This is especially true when private car traffic competes with public transport on public roads. And a few other interesting insights that emerged from our network workshops. We learned from planners that in the last decade, Copenhagen has experienced a 28% increase in the total number of cars, but their population has only increased by 13% in that amount of time. And in Helsinki, over 50% of the population owns a car, but the share of daily trips that are made by car is only 21%. So that's a lot of cars that are sitting and not being used on a regular basis, and therefore taking up space and resources, and this is for governments, the general public, and the individual car owner. The key here is that vehicle electrification swaps out one kind of fuel for another, but the infrastructure of the city remains the same, and many of you have probably seen this illustration before showing this. Transport solutions are not sustainable if they require cities and regions to invest in and maintain infrastructure that contradicts long-term social, economic, and environmental goals. And while not all car trips can be replaced by the bicycle, figures from Denmark show that residents rely on the car for trips that are within a reasonable cycling or walking distance. For example, almost a quarter of all trips between 2 and 3.9 kilometers are made by car, and 8% of trips under 2 kilometers are still made by car in Denmark. As planners consider where to prioritize their attention, it may be useful to identify areas where people continue to use the car for trips below these bikeable and walkable thresholds, and consider the potential urban design or infrastructure barriers that prevent those residents from choosing the bike over the car. And these may be actual barriers that we can see in the public space of the design, but they could also be perceived barriers, and those perceptions could differ from population group to population group. And it's also crucial that if cities and regions discourage traveling by private car, other options, of course, have to be accessible, affordable, and efficient to ensure that residents have fair and reliable transport to meet their daily needs. So sustainability goals cannot be achieved unless we develop a whole built environment that facilitates active mobility, and that really requires rethinking the whole environment, rethinking the systems that we're working within. So as I said, we are just barely scratching the surface. There are a lot more myths to explore, other examples from research and practice, and some specific policy and planning implications that will be in our policy brief, and that will be published around end of December, early January. And it'll be available on the Nordregio website. But I will wrap up with a final question. As I stated at the beginning, there are a couple of ways we can consider the green transition in the Nordic region. Are we letting the green transition steer us into maintaining urban and regional planning that tethers us to unsustainable land use and development practices? Or, very cheesily, can we pedal the green transition forward in a holistically sustainable way with solutions that account for emissions reductions, but also develop a built environment that enables economic and social flourishing? Thank you.
And the answer to that rhetorical question, of course, has to be yes, we can.
Because, if you're an optimist.
What a great way to end this session. You know, we discussed how can we make economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social sustainability get together in that sweet zone. And clearly, biking is part of that answer. Thank you so much once again, Lisa.